Hello, this is Craig Brailsford with Red Chip Companies. Thank you for joining today's event with Enlivex Therapeutics, which trades on the Nasdaq under the ticker ENLV. With us today, we have Shai Novik, the Executive Chairman of Enlivex, and Oren Hershkowitz, the Chief Executive Officer. We will begin with a presentation in a moment, and then we'll open the event to your questions. You may submit your question at any time. Click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Before we begin, please allow me to read the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management, constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical fact should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. I now turn this webinar over to the Enlivex team. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm very happy to be here and share updates on the recent positive and very exciting data that we provided from the interim analysis, 6 months interim analysis of the phase 1/2 knee osteoarthritis study. We thought it might make sense to walk with you and explain the data. So I'll start with a few background slides for those who are less familiar maybe with Enlivex, and just to give an update on where we are in general. But the focus of this call will be to provide the update on our recent news. So forward-looking statement. So just again, as a quick reminder, Enlivex is a clinical stage pharmaceutical cell therapy company developing a next generation off-the-shelf cell therapy to targeting inflammatory indications. We're doing this using our platform called Allocetra. This is a really novel therapeutic approach where we're using our cells in order to modulate and reprogram immune cells called macrophages, and by doing so, targeting rebalancing of inflammatory states and therefore providing resolution to unmet inflammatory conditions. This is a completely novel approach. To the best of our knowledge, nobody's using that approach. We're targeting substantial market with defined as unmet medical conditions, as I'll show in a few seconds. And the beauty of this is that it's a very simple approach relying on a naturally occurring processes in our human bodies, and which makes it a very cost-effective cell therapy, simple cell therapy for manufacturing, yielding a ready-to-use off-the-shelf drugs. The company is managed by really seasoned and experienced management, both from the management perspective and from the board perspective. And I'll say a few words about technology again, just a reminder, even for those that are familiar with the drug, it's always, with the company, it's always important to remind on this innovative concept of Allocetra. So as I said before, we're targeting macrophages. Macrophages are critical cells playing many roles in our body, both in housekeeping, but also in response to pathogens and inflammatory conditions. And those macrophages, one of their roles is to clear dying cells, what we call apoptotic cells. And cells are dying in a normal way in our body as we speak now. So it is important to clear them. As part of that role of macrophages, when they identify a dying cell, they do this by identifying certain signals expressed over the membrane. The macrophage identify that signal that a dying cell expressed, which lead to engulfment of the dying cells, and that triggers multifactorial processes that eventually lead to the fact that those macrophages become pro-homeostatic or pro-resolution. So they promote actually resolution and prevent inflammatory and prevent inflammation. And that's very important because cells are dying all the time. So we want to have immune cells, clearing those cells with no triggering of inflammation. The idea of using that as a therapeutic drug was by the company co-founder, Professor Loma Borach, who's one of the leading scientists that actually identified this phenomenon. And we actually using that naturally occurring process in order to treat in chronic and acute inflammatory diseases. So this is on the left side, that's Allocetra. Those are the signals over the memory that I was explaining. And they're identified by macrophages. The way we manufacture the drug is really simple. We take cells from healthy donors, we take them through our proprietary process, expose them to certain conditions. It's no relatively simplified, very simplified manufacturing process, but at the end of the day, we generate those cells, we freeze them, and they're ready to be used. This leads to the fact that the drug is really cost effective. And we'll touch about this in the next few slides in the context of osteoarthritis. In terms of the mechanism, once we inject Allocetra, those are the cells here we have an inflammatory condition that could be acute, systemic, or local and chronic, such as osteoarthritis. We can inject Allocetra directly into a target joint, for example, or systemically. Once we do that, the macrophages, which are pro-inflammatory active macrophages that kind of continue to trigger this inflammatory condition, they engulf our cells, and by doing so, they go through this naturally occurring reprogramming process that eventually leads to the fact that they promote resolution and anti-inflammatory state. And that's the beauty of the technology because it actually targets the core of the problem. So this is what we do at Enlivex. It's completely novel and it allows us to really develop the drug as a platform for different indications. We have several studies ongoing. The ones that really are following us know that we actually opened several clinical studies through 23 and 24. A phase 2 randomized controlled study in a sepsis. I'll set up front now, the focus of this call is to talk about osteoarthritis. The current situation is that we're still doing the analysis for the 1-year follow-up data for the sepsis study. And once we'll complete that analysis and we'll have an understanding on the long-term follow-up data, we'll decide how to move on with this, whether to look for a partner or any of those options that we already described in the past. This is still relevant, but we're not going to discuss about this at this call. I think what we want to talk about is really the exciting news from the interim analysis from the second study, that's the moderate knee osteoarthritis. And I'll elaborate a lot about the indication and study design in the follow-up studies and obviously about the results and the next steps. We also have another open clinical study in end-stage osteoarthritis. Those are patients that are in more advanced stages that are indicated for knee replacement surgery. And I'll provide a quick update about this study. An additional study which is ongoing is the basal thumb osteoarthritis. That's an additional different joint that is the third leading most common osteoarthritis affected joint. Another 2 studies that we commenced this year, the psoriatic arthritis and the TMJ joint osteoarthritis. So many different studies in different indication, different joints that are ongoing. So let's talk for a second about osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is a disease that actually the manifestation of the disease occurs when there is a cartilage damage or a cartilage degradation. But actually what happens is that triggers a low inflammatory condition that attracts macrophages, the cells that I was talking about before, into the joint space, and they actually become pro-inflammatory macrophages. And by doing so, they promote more inflammation, and that leads to additional degradation of the cartilage, which again attract more pro-inflammatory macrophages. And there you get this vicious cycle that eventually lead to the fact that we have a chronic low-grade inflammatory state that is led by macrophages, by pro-inflammatory macrophages. Um, it's in terms of the disease itself, that's the most common chronic life debilitating disease. It's estimated that in the US we have something like 32 million cases of knee osteoarthritis in adults. And that's projected to grow substantially in the coming years. So the market today is estimated around 7 billion, but is expected to grow even to 15 billion dollars in 2030. It's really a huge unmet medical condition. And currently the standard of care is really lifestyle changes, physiotherapy, pain relief medications, and eventually surgery, which means a knee replacement surgery. We have most of the drugs approved for this indication is really pain relief, but nothing really effectively work, and we remain, and those patients remain with a painful, life debilitating condition and without an efficacious therapy. And this is where we step in. So why again, why Allocetra is so suitable by this time, I think you understood that Allocetra is targeting macrophages, and we know how to reprogram those pro-inflammatory macrophages. And in the recent years, many publications and many KOLs acknowledge that actually macrophages, those pro-inflammatory macrophages, are critical in the initiation and the maintenance of that chronic low-grade inflammatory state in osteoarthritis, which leads to cartilage degradation. At the end of the day, you find yourself with no cartilage, but during that long-term process, what triggers mostly the pain is actually the inflammation itself. And the largest segment of osteoarthritis patient that suffers from osteoarthritis for many years actually are at this moderate to severe state before they completely lose their cartilage. Many studies try to triggers cartilage regrow, and although some of them were successful, eventually that didn't lead to an improvement in patient pain. It didn't lead to pain relief, and that's because a substantial part of that pain is associated with the inflammation and not necessarily with the bone over bone, which may be more typical to really end stage patients. So most of the people may benefit from a strategy that will change their inflammatory condition within the joint. And this is exactly what Allocetra is designed to do. So I'll say that we kind of started, I'll describe this case study that we had several years ago that kind of blew our mind and said, okay, we need to develop Allocetra for osteoarthritis. And that was a very unique case of what we call vanishing bone disease. It's a patient with really advanced um, erosive osteoarthritis. And that patient was hospitalized prior to treatment with Allocetra for for many years, suffering from that condition. Eventually was hospitalized for 9 months in a row. And we gave her Allocetra, 5 injections of Allocetra, weekly injections, and we started immediately to see an improvement in that inflammatory state. Eventually, she was discharged from the hospital with all of our inflammatory markers went down. She had fluid drainage that declined and eventually was went back to normal. And we've been following that patient for several years now, and she's still okay. So this is really an extreme case of a very difficult to treat osteoarthritis or erosive osteoarthritis, where Allocetra worked remarkably and for many years already. So there's a persistent response there. And that led to the first study that we initiated, which is an end-stage osteoarthritis. So these patients are patients that are indicated for knee replacement therapy. They are very advanced in the progression of their disease, been in that state for many years. And unfortunately, with the available medication that we have today, they progressed into a stage that are already indicating that the only solution that they currently have is actually surgery. So we gave those patients a single injection of Allocetra and followed them for the study design followed them for 12 months. By this time, we've actually injected Allocetra to this patient. 18 patients received a single injection of Allocetra. We published interim data last year where we saw a substantial improvement in pain that this patient reported. You can see at the baseline at a scale of 0 to 10, they had 7.6 average pain, which, as you all understand, means that they were very painful. And although they are very, very advanced in their disease and already indicated for knee replacement surgery, we saw a substantial pain reduction of 51% with two patients out of nine that had a complete, at 3 months, sorry, with two patients out of nine that had a complete pain relief, going down from an average of 8.5 to 0, which is remarkable. And only one patient actually out of this nine continued to surgery, to a knee replacement surgery with no safety adverse events reported related to Allocetra. So this was an initial indication on top of what we saw before that we're heading here into the right direction and maybe potentially changing the paradigm of treating osteoarthritis. That led us to design and open the follow-up phase 1/2 study that we're going to talk about mostly now, which is a multi-center, multi-country study that has two phases. The first phase is a safety run-in, which means that we actually evaluated several doses. The first three groups at escalating doses between low and high dose, and another group that were injected every 2 weeks, and another group that were injected with Allocetra once a month. We now completed the 6 month follow-up of the first 12 patients from that the first three cohorts, and what we're reporting today is actually 6 month data that is following actually a 3 month interim data we reported for the same patients. The next phase is ongoing. That's the phase 2. It's a randomized, placebo-controlled study that is statistically powered to show differences between pain relief between the active Allocetra group and the placebo group. This study is ongoing, and we'll talk about this. This stage is ongoing, and we'll talk about it soon. So let's go to the population in the study. As you remember, I told you that the largest segment of patients with osteoarthritis is actually the moderate to severe. This is characterized by an X-ray that those patients undergo, which is reflected here in a KL grade 2 or 3, where most advanced patients have a KL 4 and completely healthy patients have 0. So again, we gave them 3 injections of Allocetra every 2 weeks, and we followed them by first, of course, the primary endpoint, the safety, but also we followed their change in NRS pain, which is a self-patient reporting questionnaire, and an additional questionnaire called WOMAC. That's a validated questionnaire that actually address pain as well as function and stiffness. And this is a summary of this really exciting result that we got and announced 2 days ago. And I think it's important to explain what we're seeing here. So what we did interim analysis for those 12 patients at 3 months and 6 months. We addressed their pain by self-reporting questionnaire, as I said before. That's a pain NRS. but also, and additionally, they were filling a questionnaire that's called WOMAC, which is a validated questionnaire that assessing, again, pain, function, and stiffness. What this graph on the right-hand side presents is the change from baseline, the average percentage change from baseline of all of those patients. So what you can see here at dark blue versus light blue is the 3 months versus 6 months and all of those parameters. So if we look at the pain NRS, you can see that at 3 months they had 50% pain reduction, and at 6 months it was 47%. If we go to the WOMAC validated questionnaire, which it's well within aligned well within the results of the pain NRS, showing 52% and 51% at 3 months and 6 months. They had also reported an improved function. So 42% at 3 months, 46% improved function, and a reduced stiffness by 37% and 40% at 3 months and 6 months. Stating the obvious that the safety profile was excellent, there were no severe adverse events, and the adverse events that were reported were associated with injection were mostly mild and transient. Now, in terms of responders, and that's a very critical point that we're going to talk about in a second as well, we used an official criteria that define responders. And according to this criteria, we saw 83% responders to the treatment at 3 months as well as at 6 months. Now, what this data tells you is, first of all, that we see a substantial pain relief and improved functionality closely after injecting Allocetra. So at 3 months, many drugs, pain relief, are actually, in corticosteroids, for instance, are monitoring the effect over pain for 3 months, but most of them are not providing durability for more extended period like 6 months. And patient suffering, and I'm assuming that at least some of you that hear this are unfortunately experiencing pain in their knee, because that's so common. They're looking for both. They're looking for an immediate relief in the pain, but also for a durability of that relief. So although we had the case report and although we understand the potential mechanism of action, etc., this is actually the first time we're able to show that not only we see a substantial pain relief, we see a durability at 6 months. Now, that's extremely important. I'll just to give some context, for instance. So Xylerta is extended release of corticosteroids. And the data I'm presenting here is based on their phase 3 data that demonstrated a very nice pain relief at 12 months, at 12 weeks, as you can see here, with the approved dose of 32 milligrams, that's in black. You can see that they had, compared to placebo, they had -3 pain reported pain relief compared to placebo, which is aligned with what we see. But they were start seeing at 12 weeks already a rebound of that effect, and eventually at 6 months, they had no differences between the treated group and the placebo group. And this is an approved drug by the FDA. I think that actually provide, I hope that that provide for you, for the listeners here, how important is it that we were not only able to demonstrate substantial pain relief at 3 months, but also at 6 months. Now, if you go and evaluate, for instance, drugs that are out there approved today or in development, the percent of responders that we saw here at 83% is really remarkable. And this is based on official criteria. The magnitude of the pain relief reported here suggests that this potentially, if we were at the phase 3 study, this potentially would lead to an approval by the FDA. Now, we need to do the randomized study. We're waiting. I'm putting up front all the caveats that this is a small sample size from an open label part. But when you kind of try to kind of validate the magnitude of the data, the durability to what's out there today, the data is remarkable, and that's why we're so excited about it. So to summarize this part, and I would like to mention and summarize this using four important points. First of all, although this is the first study in the target population of moderate to severe osteoarthritis, this is the first study we're running. We still have heterogeneity and diversity in the population. We're presenting here data from an open label part of the study with several doses evaluated. And as you know, we moved to the phase 2 part of the study with the highest dose selected. So we think there's even more room for improvement, although the initial data is suggesting that this is really a promising data to support Allocetra as a novel and innovative treatment for osteoarthritis. So in terms of efficacy, we see immediate and durable pain relief, improved functionality, reduced stiffness at 3 months and 6 months, according to this preliminary data. It's a novel, as I mentioned before, novel immunomodulated treatment. We're not using any lubricate or pain relief. It's actually a novel mode of action that treats the core of the chronic state of that inflammatory condition of those patients. In terms of the drug, and this is very important, like many companies are trying to develop treatment for osteoarthritis, some using a very sophisticated and very expensive approaches, while our pharmacoeconomical model suggests that based on the manufacturing cost, based on the expected dose and dose regimen, we think that Allocetra will provide a very competitive and affordable pricing, and that's a critical part. And it's not just about getting approval, it's about the commercial ability of the drug. And on top of that, it's really easy to use. It's an off-the-shelf. There's no need to do any drug manipulation. You throw the drug and inject it directly in the orthopedic office. All of this makes us very exciting about the result that we've obtained at 6 months. And it was very important for us to put this up front and present it to you. Shai, anything you want to emphasize or add to what I just said?
I think that I can only echo. You touched on all the points, obviously, and I think we cannot stress enough that the last point that Oren made was it's not enough to try and lower pain, okay? Because lowering pain is like taking Tylenol, which may be very effective, but if the headache is not transient headache, it's a real problem, then the headache will continue to reappear over and over. So it's okay to take pain medications for when you have pain in the knee, but the question is, how do you actually resolve it? And the second bullet here, this novel immunomodulating agent that we are presenting, we believe has maybe for the first time in the history of trying to treat osteoarthritis or low-grade inflammation in general, has a real chance of offering, for the first time, a real treatment. Not just, I mean, obviously, there's less pain. Oren just showed you. That's how we measure. Is it painful or not? But it's not just the pain. The reason that the pain is decreasing is not because Allocetra is a pain medication. It's very important to mention that. The pain is decreasing because the inflammation is decreasing. Therefore, the pain is decreasing. So if the inflammation is decreasing, this means that the vicious cycle that Oren mentioned of inflammation, degradation, all the way After 10 years, they go, unfortunately, many of them into knee replacement surgery. Maybe this vicious cycle can pause, right? Can retreat a little bit and pause. Now, we don't have the 10-year data, right? We don't know. But right now, at least, looking at the data that we have and durability, it's I think it's quite impressive. And the last point is that Oren touched on is the issue of the cost. It's not enough to have a novel agent that can offer not only pain relief, but actual trying to treat the problem or pause it, at least the degradation. The other thing is what our orthopedists are typically how are they used to treating those patients, right? And what type of costs are associated with that? So if we had a very fancy solution that does everything we're talking about, but costs, $50,000 for injecting into a knee, I mean, it just doesn't work, right? The commercial model just doesn't work. But here we have this really incredible combination of extremely low cost therapy, which is novel and may change the paradigm. So internally at Enlivex, we were waiting on this data. We're quite excited. With the caveats, as Oren said, we're going to need to wait until we get the full data from the randomized control segment of the study. But so far, this looks in the right path.
Thank you, Shai. I think we'll pause here. We have several questions, and we probably need to allocate the next 10 or 15 minutes for that. Craig, if you want to go ahead and start the second stage of this webinar.
Absolutely. Please type in your questions, everyone. And to do that, click the Q&A button there in the bottom of your Zoom window. Please do not use the raise hand tool. We just can't take spoken questions today. We got a lot of people on. Let's start off with this one. Can you provide a comparison of your clinical data to clinical data from current therapies?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I can say that, looking at several therapies that are actually approved, such as the one that I've provided today, the 50% magnitude and the 83% response rate is put us, position us well above what we expected, what we've seen in other studies. I think we have to wait, to be honest, to the randomized controlled part, but 83%, for instance, is substantially larger than what you see in other studies. Some of them of medications that were approved already. I see also a few other questions that I can I see here about background medication that might be permitted in future clinical studies of Allocetra. That's something that is common for Allocetra, but also for other osteoarthritis studies that allows a limited and well-controlled pain, for instance, paracetamol, standard pain medication, pain relief medication, in a very controlled way, just as a rescue for patients that are not responding well or in the placebo group or whatever.
Are there any trial sites in Northern California?
Not yet, to be honest. Maybe it's a good question to lead us to kind of where we're seeing this evolving. Because I also saw a question about I also heard a question about, we can take this all the way to the market and so on. Obviously, the data from the randomized part of that study will continue to follow with what we're seeing now. The next phase will be to run, a phase 2-3 or something of that kind. That will be a study that will include sites also in the US. That's what we expect. So currently we don't have sites in South California, but might have in the future. In terms of whether we can take this, the market is huge. I think I've explained that before. Whether we have the cash to cover, maybe Shah, you want to talk a little bit about, how do we see that from a cash perspective?
Can you give us a ballpark range of how low cost this could be?
Sure. Oren, do you want to take it? Do you want me to take it?
So in terms of the cost of the drug, it's still, it depends eventually on the selected dose and so on. So we're talking about a range, but we are talking about anywhere between a couple of hundreds of dollars to something like 1,500 per treatment. That's the current evaluation, and that's completely competitive for whatever is approved today, which is not that effective.
Like PRP, and I mean these type of high-end procedures that are typically offered to patients that have received, an injection of corticosteroids and they felt great for a month, but then, then it doesn't help, and the doctors, as you know, well, corticosteroids also create some damage in the joint, so long-term damage. So they're really resisting to plug in too much corticosteroids into the joints. So this is something that I think is highly competitive with the high-end PRP-like solutions, which involve taking blood and then kind of amplifying different growth factors and then re-injecting it and so forth. So these treatments typically are in the range of about $2,000 to $3,000 or something like that. So within this high-end range, the profit margin, the potential gross profit margin for Allocetra is tremendous. Okay, and it's very, very consistent with, and it can, in our opinion, I mean, obviously we're paid to think like that, but we believe that the drug will be successful, and we believe that the drug will have a very strong competitive advantage over the PRP-like solutions that don't have a lot of success. Typically, doctors do them because they don't have any other choice. The patient comes back and says, I don't know what to do. What are we going to do now, right? So when the patient says that, then you do something, okay? So you use PRP-like, and for some people it works, for many others it doesn't. And even for those that it works in the short term, and then it doesn't work. So there's a lot of room for growth in this industry. And I saw one of the questions here that talked about the size of the, I believe the size of the market. If I say, it says how big is the market and so forth, and do we have enough cash to get it to market? So that's the one question. And I think and I think Oren had that in one of his slides, which obviously it's a very, very big market with a tremendous. It's what we call the unfortunate growth for people, but very good growth for companies like Enlivex. It's a very growing population that have tremendous problems with osteoarthritis and no good solutions. With respect to the cash, obviously we are following the same pattern that typically small companies like us follow. It's our job right now to complete the randomized controlled study and prove that we have a very strong signal and that it looks like we're going to be changing the industry. When that happens, what we would be looking for is to most likely partner with some larger companies that have a strategic interest in this, and with their help, try to get it to market. We do not plan to take this market to market on our own. Oren, maybe you can go through some of the other questions.
Yeah, how do you measure function improvement? When should additional data be published? When will this phase will be completed? So there are three questions here. I'll take them one by one. We measure function improvement by, as I said, there's a validated questionnaire that we're using. We're using two endpoints for addressing efficacy, secondary endpoints, that they will actually both are are being used in and accepted by the FDA, by the way, for phase 3. So it's the same endpoint we're using here, and that's important because we can use the data to educate ourselves what's the best way to design the next study. So WAMOC is a questionnaire, is a validated questionnaire, have three sub class that he assesses: pain, function, and stiffness. So patients are actually self-reporting and answering questions related to their functionality, how much they walk, how much painful is when they climb stairs or whatever. So this is the way to address function improvement. And as I said, we saw 46%, which is pretty uh, remarkable improvement. When should additional data be published? Currently, as I said, we're recruiting according to the timelines for the stage 2 part of the study, for the randomized control part of the study, and we're expecting to get the 3 months readouts Q3 this year. When will this phase be completed? Again, so I think that answer both the 3 months data from the phase 2 part will be Q3, and then 6 months as Q4. The study will follow up patients all the way to 12 months. But if the data is successful, we will continue the development from that stage already. What
Maybe
countries and
maybe while you're reviewing some of the other questions, I can take the last one here.
Okay, go ahead.
Out. What percentage of patients who are in the KL3 deterioration level that are included right now in our trial go on to have replacement surgeries? So I just want to make sure that we clarify here. Typically the process of degradation goes on for years, right? So from the time that this starts and there's a slight pain and you take Tylenol and that's okay, and kind of continues on and on and on and on. So that particular patient goes on from being what we call KL, okay? The degree, so KL1, and then goes on to be a KL2, and then a KL3, and then the final stage is a KL4. When they get to KL4, in many cases, what happens is that they just can't take it anymore, and they've tried many different things, but that takes years, right? Many different years. And then they decide, typically, it says, you know what, we just can't do it anymore. And we'll have, they go on a consulting session with the treating physicians, and they decide to go on to take a knee replacement surgery. So we are not testing in our study. We don't have an endpoint in our study, which remember, it's a KL2 and 3. We don't measure how many of those move on to knee replacement surgery, because typically they would not. These would not within the time frame of the study. Maybe they will 5 years from now, right? Or something like that, because there's going to be continued degradation. What we do is we are following right now what the FDA typically is mandating for these type of studies. Okay, so it's Oren mentioned that. So it's a question of pain, and it's being measured versus baseline for a period of 3 months in many studies, for some 6 months, for some 3 and 6. But so this is essentially the time frame. And by the way, if at the end of the day, a drug which shows effect in 3 months, in 6 months, and needs to be administered every 6 months, let's just say that it's been administered every 6 months, and then it keeps the patient with the same level of very low pain level for many years and stops the degradation, would be a huge winner, right? So we're not, it's not necessarily that because we just don't know right now whether the drug that's going to be administered with one treatment session, is that drug going to stop, not going to have to be re-injected ever? We don't know, right? Because we're following those patients, well, hopefully, maybe, but even if The only thing that happens is that it's going to show very good safety, very good effect, and going to stop the degradation and going to be injected once every 6 months. That's a huge win for us and a huge win for all the patients in the vast community of osteoarthritis sufferers, right? So that's kind of where we are. Oren, I'm going to give you back the lead on
So we kind of ran out of time, so I'll go quickly maybe with short answers. In the 83% responders, are you noticing certain characteristics with the population that you can target for future recruitment? I think this is an excellent question. We are planning to remember that this is currently a small group, but we are planning to look at responders versus non-responders or low responders and try to characterize them and educate ourselves what will be the target, enrich the potential responder population in follow-up studies. So I think that's a very good question. Is there a possibility to monitor this patient for more than 6 months? So I said, as I said, we're following them for 12 months. To clarify, Allocetra does not grow back cartilage, but stops the continued degradation when you leave Spain. So it's also a very good question. From a mechanism point of view, we're changing the inflammatory environment, right? Which actually triggers the cartilage degradation. Now, cartilage, by definition, in a healthy people, there is a balance between what we call metabolism, catabolism, or degradation and rebuild of the cartilage. Whether if we stop that, that may lead to potentially some cartilage regrowth. We don't know. Well, that's not what we claim for at this stage, but that's something that we will follow. Of course, the study includes imaging of those patients. So another question. So I'll answer that one as well. We are doing at baseline and the follow-up visits, we're doing imaging of those patients. We don't have the data yet. Imaging takes more time, but that will be more relevant, I think, to the actually to randomized part where we'll review the imaging for something like 130 patients, and we'll be able to compare it to placebo. What countries and medical centers are you running the study? So the study is mostly run actually in Europe, for instance, in Denmark, also in Israel. And the next phase, as I said, will include also the state. Is the drug going to be accessible to any doctor, or will it be in a special clinic in the Northeast US? That's a little bit ahead of time. The plan is that it will be accessible for any orthopedic or rheumatologist. What is the industry interested in the new novel biologic? I think we talked about is the cost per treatment. That's something we talked about. There's a huge interest because this is a huge, serious unmet medical condition. So it's definitely very, very appealing when you have a new drug which is cost effective that actually changed what was not treatable before. How much outstanding stock does the company have? I think it's 21 million, right? Shy, if I'm not mistaken, 21 million outstanding stock.
It's 21.9, right?
21.9. Yes, we are considering partnering with, pharma, Europe, Asia. That's both Shai and I work together. In the previous company that Shai was the founder, and we actually followed very similar. We developed a long-acting growth hormone using a technology. We don't have time to go too much into this, but we developed a long-acting growth hormone, and eventually we're able to do a licensing deal with Pfizer and continue the development with Pfizer all the way to approval. And that drug, it's called Ngenla. It's improved today in 43, 44 countries already globally. And we know what big pharma are looking for. It's not just the clinical data, it's additional aspects, the quality of the drug, the manufacturing processes, and also it's something that we know how to do and what they're expecting from us. And the licensing deal was following a successful phase 2 study, which is the stage that we currently are. Is it less hurdle than the FDA? It depends. In some aspects, FDA is more painful, and in some it's the EU. Eventually, it's a huge market, both in the US, of course, and globally. And we will develop the drug to target the requirements of both FDA, Europe, and other regions. Anything, Shai, you want to address? I think we kind of exhausted the time.
Sure, Oren, maybe there's a question there. Will the same efficacy endpoints employed in this most recently reported trial be usable in a pivotal context? You kind of responded to that, but maybe you can just reiterate.
Yeah, so the beauty of it is the same endpoints, both the what we call NRS, again, the scale between 0 to 10, that will be used in the follow-up phase 3 study as a primary endpoint, and the warm-up. Both of them are relevant, and that makes our life easier, so to speak, because that can help us to properly design the follow-up study, because we know the effect size, because we know it's the same, the population, and so on. In some cases, in some indication, that's not the case, and it makes it the risk between moving to successful phase 2 to phase 3 is larger than in cases where you have the same endpoints.
And maybe there's a last question here that is remaining on the board. Maybe I can take that. Do you only recruit orthopedic physicians, or incorporate pain physicians, psychiatrists, sport medicine doctors to broaden the field of experience? So I just want to make it very, very clear that what we are doing right now in this vertical of osteoarthritis is we're trying to move as efficiently, methodically, and responsibly forward to make sure that we are in line with the requirements of the agency, right? Of the various agencies, whether European agencies or FDA, to move forward, assuming that we have the results in the upcoming top line of the randomized control study. And that basically is framing us to use specific patient population, and to use specific endpoints, and to use specific clinical protocols. And so we cannot involve sites and doctors which do not comply 100% with the way that the trials are designed and what the FDA wants us to do. While I completely agree that for some people, some of the pain can be alleviated by maybe consulting with a sports doctor, and maybe consulting with a psychologist and so forth. Unfortunately, the FDA has a very, very clear definition of what they want to see, right? And that's why when you drill it down, that's how we design the study and how we recruit patients. So I think it's a very smart question and comment, but for us, we just have to stick with the rules that are being defined for us. Oren, get back to you.
Yeah, so to summarize, I think you understood that we're very excited about the 6 months interim data. We are cautious, it's still at early stage, but it does provide for us a good indication that we are heading towards the right direction. And we apologize for exhausting the time here, or extending the time more than planned, but I think we really wanted to address all the questions, and there were good ones. Hopefully, we were able to address all of your questions, and we thank you for your time.
I think, Oren, I want to echo, I think that, we weren't also sure that post the press release that a lot of investors actually understood what was written in the press release. It was important for us to do this webinar just to reiterate and make sure that we clarify this data, in our opinion, looks extremely strong and a very good indication of what this drug can potentially do. We're very hopeful that it's going to be reproduced in the final results of the study. And we want to thank all of you for taking the time to come to this session, taking the time to ask questions. We know we haven't answered all of them. We apologize. We didn't have the time, but thank you so much. And we look forward to keeping you with additional updates in the future. Thank you.